because there's not much out there. But my point is this, though. He would spend the next 3 years in that Arabian desert alone with God. For 3 years, he was just saying, God, I'm in a place of solitude. You have converted me. God, you have saved me. And now I just want to be with you because I want to learn about you. And you say, and so here's my point. The point of solitude is this: to learn about God and from God. Okay? You got to catch that. It's not just learning a bunch of factual, getting a bunch of head knowledge about God. To learn from God, you must spend time alone with God. There's no way around it. If you want to learn something from God, you have to spend time alone with God. Now, I know what some of you are sitting there thinking, and folks, most of you, you know how my life is by now with these 2 small kids that we have. My wife works a second shift. Our schedules conflict each other. I don't really have a lot of time in the day to be alone. I'm either with the kids or something. Now I'm going to start back to work. I have to start back to work tomorrow. And so my day, I don't really have a lot of time alone. And that is the biggest excuse that all of you make. I just don't have the time. Folks, you have the time. The problem is you don't want to make it a necessity in your life. And when you decide to make it a necessity, when it becomes important to you, you will find the time to spend alone with God to learn about Him. You see, if you study the lives of great men and women of God, each can point to some formative times that they spent alone with God. They may have been surrounded by other people, but they were at a point which they felt God was all they had. And in their solitude, in their alone time, God shaped and molded them into the people that He wanted them to be. Let me give you an example. Most of you know of Moses from the Bible. Well, you can divide Moses' life basically into 3 40-year segments. The first 40 years, he was in Pharaoh's house. The next 40 years of his life, he was in the same Arabian desert that we're looking at here with Paul. And then the last 40 years of his life, he was leading Israel out of Egypt and into the Promised Land. And if I asked you which of these 3 40-year periods was the most important, we would all be tempted to say that last one, that the last 40 years of his life, where he led the people out of Egypt into the Promised Land, would be the most important. But I believe that it never would have happened without that middle period. Without that 40-year period where God had to take him into the desert, and God had to shape him and to mold him, and just to say, you got to spend time alone with me, because Moses, here is what I need you to do. That was really the most important time of his life. You see, what was the last thing Moses did before leaving Egypt for the desert? What was the last thing he did? He killed somebody. And he killed a man. He took matters into his own hands. And in the power of the flesh, God sent him to the desert. And it took years. It took 40 years for God to shape Moses and to mold him into the person that he needed to be so he could be that leader. And when he learned that when you come to the place that God is all you have, then you find that He's all you'll ever need. Think about Jesus. Well, this is a good illustration. Think about Jesus. He had an incredible 3.5 year ministry while He was here on earth. He opened the blind people's eyes. He healed deaf people. He raised people from the dead. He was saving people. But what exactly do you know about Jesus from the time he was, say, around age 12 to 30? Not a lot. The Bible doesn't really tell us much. But you know that those were the silent years. Those were the years that he spent in solitude, the obscurity, the working in the carpenter shop. No doubt that he was going to God in prayer every day, studying, meditating, preparing for that ministry. And then when he was 30 years old, he didn't just come on the scene one day and say, well, here I am. I'm going to go down to the synagogue. I'm going to set me up an office. I'm going to heal the people. We'll start us a nice little list here. And of healing services and things like that. That is not what he did. Before Jesus started his earthly ministry, where did he go? He went into the wilderness. And for 40 days and for 40 nights, he was alone with God. You see, folks, it starts with solitude. And young people, when you get up in the morning and you got to get ready for school, and I know you got to look good and you got to get the right clothes on and you got to do all that stuff, but listen, the most important part is to start your day off with a few moments in solitude with God. And folks, that just doesn't go for the young people. That goes for you. When you get up in the morning and you have to go to work, start your day off with God. Spend some time with Him. That is what Jesus did. 40 days and 40 nights. He began His ministry in solitude as He began each day. Mark chapter 1 verse 35, Jesus says, or the Bible says, in the morning, rising up a great while before day, He went out and departed into a solitary place and there prayed. So my point is this. I thank God that I got to go to a Christian school to receive a degree and so forth. And I've got this piece of paper that says, congratulations, you've got a master's in religious education and all that stuff. And I'm so thankful that I had the opportunity to do that. But let me tell you, it's what I learned directly from God when I spend time alone with Him in prayer and in Bible study. And when I do that on a daily basis, that is what matters the most. It's not the piece of paper I have up on the wall from the college or the seminary. It's when I spend time alone with Him. So let me ask you this morning, are you in that place of solitude? Let God do a deeper work in your soul during this time. And maybe you don't have a place of solitude. And again, we can make all of the excuses in the world. I don't have the time. I don't have somewhere I can go. Quit making excuses. Make time. Find a place where you can go and just be alone with the Lord. Have a daily devotion. Allow God to do a radical spiritual surgery on your life. Let Him mold you and shape you as a vessel of clay in the potter's hands. And so we look at Saul here. Saul went to the desert of Arabia so God could mold him and shape him. He came out a different man. He went into that desert a young man, still scarred with hatred, bitterness, no doubt a lot of confusion, thinking, God, why in the world would you save me? But he came out of the desert a tender-hearted apostle, Paul. So in the desert, God used the tool of solitude. That is the first school that you need to attend this morning. The second school, though, is the school of suffering. The school of suffering. Now I want you to turn over to Acts chapter 9 and leave your place there in Galatians 1. But if you turn over to Acts chapter 9, this is where the two kind of converge, okay? Because Acts chapter 9 was written by Luke. Galatians obviously written by Paul. And now Luke in Acts chapter 9, they kind of come together here. I want you to look in verses 22. And we're going to read verses 22 through 25. Acts chapter 9, verse 22. But Saul increased all the more in strength, and confounded the Jews who dwelt in Damascus, proving that this Jesus is the Christ. And so we have here, if you go back and you read the first part of Acts chapter 9, that is Saul's conversion. Okay, and so Saul has been converted, and now here he is in Damascus, and he's starting to make the Jewish leaders there in Damascus, he's starting to make them a little angry, because he's saying, I've been converted, and let me tell you about this guy named Jesus. And the Jews didn't want to hear that.